So, because the charging cord that I have is so small, in order to see the game properly, I'm literally playing one-handed. I have to grab the trigger like this. Being homeschooled for most of my childhood and then later becoming a high school dropout in literally 9th grade left me a lot of time to play video games. Like, most of my time was occupied by being homeschooled for most of my childhood and then later becoming a high school dropout in literally 9th grade left me a lot of time to play video games. Like, most of my time was occupied by video games. If I was not frantically trying to pester my family members into noticing my existence, which, by the way, most of the time that either failed or resulted in them being very upset with me. When I wasn't doing that, I was playing video games or hanging out with my pets. But most of the time it was video games. And a lot of the time it was the same games, because I didn't have a lot. Like, for most of my childhood, I just had the original Xbox and the GameCube, and those were handed down to me. Sometimes I was allowed to move the PS3 into my room, which could play PS1 and PS2 games. Not that we had very many of those, but most of the time that was just out in the living room. And eventually, I actually did get a 360 of my own, and I started slowly collecting the older consoles. So when I was like around 8, I started getting the Nintendo 64, I got a PS1, a Sega Genesis. All this stuff was from garage sales and yard sales, and I would get them for $1, $5. My N64 I paid like $50 or $60 for after saving up to get it at a pawn shop. And so I had a lot of the older consoles. I got an NES a couple years later. I had a lot of the older consoles, and a lot of my time was spent on the very same games, because part of the motivation for getting those consoles was that they had cheaper games than some of the newer ones, and part of the motivation for getting cheaper games was because I could not afford more expensive games. And so when you can only afford a couple high-quality, cheap games, and also the stuff that's been handed down to you, you play it again and again and again, which is what I did. Like, the other day, I was playing through Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, and by the end I had like 16 lives, and it only took me like 2 hours. About 2 or 2.5 hours, give or take, to beat the entire game. And throughout most of my playthrough, I had over 30 lives. I was running through that game. Most people cannot do that. The reason why I can do that is because I've played that game over 30 times. And the same is the case with like Halo 2 and Ninja Gaiden, which is a really hard game. I'm talking about the original NES game. These are games that I played dozens and dozens of times. In the case of Ninja Gaiden, I think it's literally been over 50 times. And that's a game where you die and fail a lot, but I can play it really quickly. The reason for all of this is because I had a lot of time on my hands. Obviously, when you're not in education at that early of an age, and are in a rural area like I was, in the literal woods, where there was nobody else around, nobody else's kids, nothing to do really, you have to make your own fun up. So I'd play with the animals, I'd use my imagination, I'd play video games. And given that I was poor, I'd play the same video games. And that, I think, led to me appreciating the amount of effort that you have to put into some of these older games, or, you know, something like Dark Souls on the newer side, for example. The amount of times that you have to die to get good in these games, it's crazy. But you end up developing an appreciation for that process. You don't, get frustrated and then throw it down to the ground. You have an appreciation for the work that goes into what you're doing, and it ends up filling up your time as a result. I think, most other people, they fill their time with tasks that are actually productive. So they're doing school, they're doing work, they're working on developing certain skills, and that is the hard fun that they derive satisfaction from. Harder games are also a hard form of fun because you have to have quick reflexes, you have to spend time thinking about strategy, you have to have quick recall, you have to be able to memorize things, and you have to think strategically about how you're going to go forward given the information that you have. And so it requires a lot of practice. It also requires using your memory and developing your reflexes. But these are all things that are working in tandem with one another, and you have to allow that process to occur. It's a difficult thing, especially with these more difficult games. And that is where the fun comes from. It comes from the process itself being difficult. I think the same is the case with people developing actually useful skills in the real world. The difference between me and those people is that they're doing something that I don't want to do, and I'm doing something that I do want to do. And so when I find myself sinking hours upon hours into the same level to be able to master it, or to be able to get every single thing in it, I'm doing that because it's something that I want to do. And they're doing those other things because they like to do things that I don't want to do. And there seems to be this divide in my own brain between things that I want to do and things that I don't want to do. And when it comes to stuff I don't want to do, it's like exceedingly difficult to get the motivation, to get myself to focus, to even process what's going on around me. Because even if I apply the same mindset that I have to video games to those activities, you have to get good, you have to accept the failure and keep going, it seems like there's this mental block that I end up running up against, where I'm sitting down, I'm doing the thing, I'm trying to do the thing, and on some level, I simply cannot parse what is right in front of me. I simply cannot seem to make the connections that are necessary in order to do the thing I'm trying to do. Schoolwork is an example of this. I can sit down and try to do the work and try to focus and try to apply myself, but the connections that need to be made are simply not being made. I am looking at it and trying to put all my most active attention into what I'm doing, and the words or the problem will just fly right over my head. It's like I'm not even processing what's right in front of me. And that's something I've had since I've been in school. I think it's related to motivation, but I also think it's like, at its very core, I think it's related to whether or not I even want to do the thing. Because it's going to be really hard to get you to process something that you don't even want to do, to pay attention to something that you don't even want to do. You're just going to be sitting there thinking, like, why the hell am I doing this? And even when I try to get those thoughts out of my mind and remind myself of why I am doing it, I still seem to struggle to even process what's going on in front of me. It's like my mind goes blank all of a sudden. But when I'm playing video games or doing a hobby of mine that arguably is productive, like something creative, for example, all of a sudden my brain is working. All of a sudden I'm able to be attentive, I'm able to care. But there are so many things in life that are necessary if you want to make a living, if you want to exist, that I seem to have this terminal blockade inside my own mind when it comes to. Like, when it comes to these things, there's just this mental block that I have that I've been trying to remove, that I've been trying to take a battering ram to and just ram through. But it's so hard because the information that I'm trying to process and put in my own brain so I can use it, the task that I'm I'm trying to make that mental leap to be able to do, it seems to just not work. Something on some fundamental level just seems to not work. And I don't know what that thing is. I don't know why I'm like this. I don't know if it's a function of habit, if like because I've been slacking for so long at such an early age that's the reason why I'm like this. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, both of my parents were unemployed for my whole childhood. My mom just got Social Security. My dad just didn't want to work because he was lazy and mentally ill. But I also saw my mom working on something just about every day. Usually it was her book. I saw her working on that for over 10 years. Writing it, editing it, doing the grammar, doing the outline, going back to the outline, revising it. I saw her doing this stuff so much each day for so many years. And I think at least as far as creativity is concerned, that was a good example for me. That was something that I felt like I could aspire to or follow. But I never saw her working, even though she always talked about the value of work and how important it is. I never saw her working. And I've seen her try to get jobs, after the two of them separated years ago, and it always ended in the same result, which was her disability getting in the way. She would have an increased amount of seizures. She would start having cognitive issues, just really upsetting stuff to watch, but she would keep trying to work because she had that held work in such a high regard and had such an affinity for it. Of course now she's just laid back because I've told her, I don't want to see you having seizures all the time. But, maybe I should have seen her trying to work like that when I was a lot younger. Of course, back then my dad was telling her not to do that for various reasons. Probably some of them were similar reasons to the ones I've stated now, which is like, you literally can't work. I'm sure that came up from him at some point. But for whatever reason, I never saw her trying to do those things as I was growing up, and so I had no example of working people when I was growing up. I mean, I had my granddad on my mom's side who owned the farm. He owned some of the tobacco fields around that area as well. He owned multiple stores and a restaurant, and he would give me these speeches about the importance of work. I never saw him doing very much of it, because by that time, by the time I was born and after, he had more or less outsourced all the functions of those businesses to other people. And so I got those speeches, I got this messaging all the time, but it was never stuff that I saw people putting into action, I never saw my dad putting this stuff into action. I never saw my mom putting this stuff into action. Never saw my granddad putting this stuff into action. So it ended up just coming off as like meaningless virtue signaling. Of course, I didn't know what that was at the time, but I think I had a preliminary understanding of what that was. I understood what the phenomenon was without having the words to describe it. And so I get a little bit older and I'm looking around at my life and I'm like, oh my god, I need to get a job at some point or else I'm going to be literally homeless. And I end up actually working way later. Literally after turning 20, I didn't work until I was 20 years old, and it was a complete shit show. And I've had some other jobs since then, none of which I've been able to hold for very long. I always run into the same issues of not being able to sleep, becoming incredibly depressed and emotionally unstable. Even though I've tried to apply all these different therapeutic methods, the CBT and all this different stuff, it's hard for me. I mean, it's really, really hard. Like, I think it all comes back to the fact that I did not have good examples. And I was not made to be on a routine at an early age. I think if I was on a routine at an early age, and I was taught how to interact with people through literally doing it, and I was given examples of people who valued work and did it a lot, I think I would not be in the position that I'm in today, where I struggle to do those things. I also think if I received more positive affirmation growing up, I received almost none. And if I was encouraged more, if I was not subjected to so much criticism from such an early age. Like, I developed a stutter when I was like 3 or 4, because whenever I would try to open my mouth, I could only get a couple words out before being shouted down and harshly criticized for whatever I was trying to say. And so whenever I would try to speak about anything, for years after that, I would just be anticipating the response that I would get. And it would create this situation where I literally felt like I couldn't get my words out because I was so scared of what was going to be coming out of their mouth after me. And that's a lot of stuff to be processing and to have on your mind when you're that age. If I was given the tools to be confident and the positive reinforcement, the encouragement that I needed, if I was taught the value of failure and making your own mistakes, if I was allowed to make my own mistakes, if I was, regarded in this more stable way, in this more responsible way, I think that would have also been a game changer for me. So it wasn't just a matter of me needing good examples and needing to be in school. I think that's definitely the case. I think it was also a matter of the approach that my parents took to parenting me was just totally wrong. And now I'm trying to sort through all of this. I'm trying to not let my trauma and upbringing and life experiences up to now define me. I'm trying to look at my life and say, well, okay, all this stuff that happened was pretty bad, but how can I take the reins here and make my life better? How can I change? How can I improve my situation? And it's really hard to figure out because it seems like, so far at every turn, I try to do things that will materially improve my life and provide me with valuable insight that will teach me something, like getting jobs, like working on my GED, like trying to educate myself. And I end up in situations that bear a frustrating resemblance to the ones I was in when I was growing up, where I was growing up reading through my school book, unable to even know what the words were, because while I could read them, I could not parse them because there was this mental block in my head that prevented the information from flowing into my head. I couldn't make heads or tails of any of it as much as I wanted to, because something about having to even sit down in the first place to do this thing I didn't want to do, created this mental block in my head. And it's been the same thing with work. I try to get a job and I try to work consistently, but I struggle to sleep on time. I'll come into work with no sleep, or at best 2, 3, 4 hours of sleep, never 7 or 8, and the quality of the sleep will be terrible as well. The exact same thing that happened to me when I was put in public school for a couple years, and also whenever my parents tried to wake me up on a schedule. I don't know if I have a sleep disorder or something, but something about my sleep makes it to where I cannot sleep at the same time every night. I don't sleep at the same time every night, and I don't wake up at the same time every day. But when I feel like I have to wake up at a certain time the next day, it makes it worse. And it's not anxiety, because I'll be clear, it used to be anxiety, but I've since fixed that. I don't overthink the next day before it happens anymore, so I can't blame that. For whatever reason, I'll just lay there, awake. I'll lie awake and not have any idea as to why I'm stuck like that. And then I'll finally get to sleep, and in the matter of no time, seemingly, the alarm clock will start ringing, and I'll have to go off to work. And I'll be sitting there, laying there, desperately wishing that I could just stay home. Please, let me just stay home. But, of course, I don't have that option, And every time that I've broken down and taken that option, it's felt like incredibly freeing to me. Like a huge weight was taken off of my shoulders. I don't know how to undo that. That liberating feeling that I've had whenever I can just stay in my house and play video games and do the things that I like to do, it always comes back to haunt me because I'll start having a productive streak and then everything will go wrong and I'll end up tiring myself out, overworking myself, and then I'm just there waiting for when I can stop doing these things that I'm making myself do. And then when I stop doing them, it's like this tremendous feeling of liberation. It seems to always come back for me. And, I try not to narrativize my life. I try not to see my life in terms of these grand stories, because that's counterproductive. But when the same thing keeps happening again and again, no matter what I try, it starts to make you wonder about how long it's going to take to be able to fix this stuff, I feel like it's going to take me a really long time to undo the years of conditioning that they've conditioned me to. But I don't know how many years that's going to be. I just know that it's an indeterminate amount of time. A lot of people online have made this point that on the internet today, it's almost like everyone presents like a North Korean version of themselves. So if you watch those videos that come out of North Korean TV, or those attempts at documentaries by people like Russian filmmakers who have been allowed into the country, it's very obvious that the people on screen are putting on an act to promote their regime, that they're coerced into behaving and seeming a certain way, and you see these like little signs that something is off. And I think to some extent in some of those movies, the footage is no doubt manipulated that way to elicit that reaction, but nonetheless, it is a totalitarian regime that causes people to behave that way to a certain extent, and that's evident in many of those movies, regardless of how much certain details might be manipulated in certain cases. So the basic fact is, these people feel compelled to present the best version of themselves and the best version of their life, regardless of how accurate that is to reality, to real world events. And I think on Instagram, on Facebook, this dynamic is very much at play as well. People feel compelled to present their life as though it's a lot better than it actually is. Many people have made this point, that they have the best girlfriend or the best boyfriend or the best job or, the best vacation. All of the little aspects of their life that are sad or painful, they're just omitted conveniently. And the really good moments that they do show you are painstakingly presented as good as humanly possible. So it creates this weird dynamic. But I think at the same time, you have the reverse of this, where, in this social media generation where people oftentimes want to present their life as a lot better than it actually is, I think you have the inverse of this as well, which is rarely talked about, where people want to present their life as a lot worse than it is, not just to garner sympathy. I think a lot of people's first assumption would be that that's the intention behind that behavior, not just to garner sympathy, but to fit within the broader image of a group. So, the people who make their lives seem really good want to be in the in crowd of the popular folks who have a good life. The people who make their lives look really bad online by aestheticizing things like smoking or being addicted to drugs or alcohol, or self-harming behavior, for example. The people who aestheticize these things and really promote them online, I think they're attempting to make their life look worse than it is as a response to those people who are making their lives look a lot better than it is. It's like they're attempting to be the inverse of that. But the goal in both cases is to get attention and notoriety from your friends or potential friends. And the core problem at the root of both of those dynamics at play is that there's a lack of authenticity. You know, it's people attempting to be a certain way to get a certain audience, to garner certain reactions, when, like, you don't have to be a certain way. You can just be. And I think that's partially why I've garnered so many negative reactions on this channel, for example, is because I do not make an active attempt to be a certain way. I just am. Of course, I would like to present information in a succinct fashion. Of course, I would like to be convincing and persuasive and charismatic. I do make an active attempt at doing those things. But those things are, like, within reason. Like, they're I think within reasonable expectation of someone if they're attempting to make an entertaining video. But I don't sacrifice the truth at the altar of entertainment, at the behest of the idea of being entertaining. I am authentic, but I make these alterations to my presentation in efforts to keep your interest. And that's reasonable. That's a reasonable thing to do. That is just practicing charisma, practicing your pro-social qualities, especially in an entertainment medium like a video. You know, that's to be expected. It's okay to do those things. I think what's not okay is actively presenting your life as though it's something that it's not, lying in pursuit of that end. And you see people doing this for notoriety, both by making their lives look really positive and by making it look really negative. And it's a strange thing. You know, I think so much of the anxiety that Gen Z has today is directly caused by this, like, incessant desire to appeal to someone, you know, some nebulous group out there in the ether, to appeal to someone. You don't have to appeal to anyone. You can just be yourself, whoever that is, whatever that looks like. You can do whatever feels right to you on the most intuitive level, because those reactions that you're going to get from other people are temporary. They only happen for a short span of time, and then they fade away just like everything else. So in the midst of that temporal thing, of those temporal reactions, wouldn't you want to focus on your own reactions to your situation, your own feelings, in other words? You're spending so much time focusing on the feelings of others that you're not spending any time focusing on your own feelings. And I think once you begin to recognize that, once you begin to harness that, you can then say to those people who might, you know, ask you, why don't you behave like this? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? You can give them a big middle finger and say, fuck you. Fuck you, I am going to be this way. Fuck you, I am going to do that. Fuck off. And in doing so, you can give your unvarnished opinion and be your most authentic or intuitive self. And that may be an unintuitive thing to do, but sometimes it's necessary for us to do unintuitive things in order to be intuitive. As counterintuitive as that sounds, it's true. You know, sometimes we have to go outside of our comfort zone, our desire to please others, or to gain notoriety or clout from others, in order to do the things that are intuitive to us that we may fear as being alienating. We may fear that our intuitions are alienating to others, but that does not matter. You ought to welcome their hatred. Welcome their hatred because it is a sign of your individuality. If people are hating on you for being authentic, for being intuitive, then it is a sign that your authenticity, the strength of your character, has elicited a strong response from them. Now, of course, I do think it is reasonable to ask ourselves, at a certain point, if literally everyone is having a problem with us, except for like fairly undesirable people, I think it's reasonable to take a look in the mirror and say, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Like, what about me is causing this? And then to seek to change that. I think it's okay to say, I am the problem, I want to change. But that has to come, based on deliberation, based on a real feeling of alienation from others that's not just based on this like shallow stuff. I think there needs to be a balance. So you can seek, I'm not saying you shouldn't seek to change parts of yourself that may be undesirable. What I'm saying is that at the same time that you're attempting to do that, you should also seek to accept the things that are unreasonable to dislike in someone. I may really like spending 1,000 hours in some, I don't know, lazy millennial dev slop like Left 4 Dead 2. That may be the case. But that's not bad, like, if you want to shit on me for spending 1,000 hours in Left 4 Dead 2, like, maybe do something better with your time. I welcome your hatred. I think there's so many things like that. Like, you have to be able to tell, like, what matters and what doesn't. If you're making people feel hurt, like, if you're just causing disruptions and arguments all the time, and being like really disagreeable and like not easy to talk to, then I think it's fair to analyze those things as like antisocial behaviors that, one ought to deliberate on and correct. But like, it's not an antisocial behavior to just have an opinion. It's not an antisocial behavior to like be a certain way, or express yourself in a certain way. Yeah, I don't know, it's a balance, and I think in efforts to, garner attention from others or acceptance from others, people get totally off balance. They lose all trace of what's important, which should be whatever's important to you. I think few vegans fail to realize that ethics is a game that we play. Now, that sounds like kind of a strange statement when you first hear it. Ethics is a game we play. What do we mean by that? Well, in any ethical conundrum, such as to eat meat or to not eat meat, there are always ways that you can counter whichever position you're looking at. So the pro-vegan side and the anti-vegan side can endlessly argue with one another over which ethical position is correct, because there are always gotchas that you can come up with. At the same time that I might say that I dislike practices such as factory farming that lead to, I would argue, the systematic torture of animals, of certain factory farming practices at least, and I would like to see those upended. A vegan would respond to me by saying, well, okay, you're not against all meat eating, you're just against procuring it in certain ways, but why don't you stop eating meat right now, given that it is harvested in this particular way? And I could make the comment that, actually our consumption choices don't truly matter, or I could make the comment that, no, I really do get my animal products from an ethical, non-factory farm source. I could approach it any number of ways, but if I am to agree with them that our consumption choices do truly matter, and that our spending in the economy on something like animal products can lead to change in the real world, policy changes that we would like to see by boycotting that industry, I feel like then I'd have to ask them, well, okay, you're against suffering and abuse and death and so on. Why are you not donating $5 each week to the World Food Program? Because every single day there are children starving to death and slowly starving to death all over the world. You may tell me that we don't think about the process by which our food is delivered to us and the suffering involved in that. And I might say to you that you don't think about the way that global trade is conducted and the suffering that is involved in that. Simply due to the inequities in our system, there is a massive amount of suffering created all over the world and death created all over the world. And you're going to sit here and tell me that whether or not I eat animal products is like the most important issue that we're facing? Maybe it's a really important one, but you can't say that. You can't maintain that position while at the same time not talking about global starvation and actually doing something about it. If you want me and expect me to do something about animal products, then you ought to be doing something about global starvation at the same time. Because donating even just $20 every week of your salary to something like the World Food Program, you could see a change that's occurring. But I doubt almost any vegan does that. And the reason that they don't is because ethics is a game that they're playing. It's a game that all of us are playing. The reality of the situation is not that there's some holier-than-thou arbiters of moral change. The reality is that they're flawed human beings who think in emotional ways and are ultimately arguing from that standpoint, but refuse to admit it because that is considered an L in the context of a debate. Even though it's just like a basic function of like being a person. And so you have this situation where there is an easy response to these people every single time. But I don't know if they're ever going to act on their values to the fullest extent. They'll make appeals to one's humanity and desire to reduce suffering around the world while arguing for their positions, but the moment that you bring up global starvation and world hunger, there's like a million and one excuses as to why they actually can't do it. In the same way that a lot of people who might be willing to concede to vegan points of view will make a million and one excuses as to why they can't switch to a non-animal based diet. The reality is that not only is a non-animal based diet not unethical, it's also silly to be having these conversations in the first place. Man, if there is one thing that I hate in this world more than anything, it's spiders I can't stand them, but I'm able to put my feelings in the back of my mind long enough to kill them, which is an ability that my spouse does not have. She is not able to do that, so she sees any kind of bug and she immediately freaks out. I remember one video we recorded back during our stay in New Mexico where it was like a spider or some kind of interesting bug. I don't remember what it was, but you can find it on YouTube. It just showed up on the floor and I was like swaying out, like trying to look at it because I thought it was so cool. It's some weird ass New Mexican bug I'd never seen before. And she was just freaking out the whole time. And you see me finally kill it after she's like over there freaking out. And I just seem to kind of enjoy, in this sick sort of way, just enjoy her getting uncomfortable by the bug. You know, women and all that. But we had a laugh about it afterwards, so it was fine. But I don't like spiders because my stepbrother used to throw them on me to wake me up. In particular, deadly venomous spiders that were native to my home state of Tennessee. We had a lot of them in that rickety old house of ours because there were cracks in the house, in the bricks of the house that let them in. Also, oftentimes, my father would not keep the multiple acres of land that we had. He wouldn't keep it in shape, so it would be overgrown in a lot of places, and that leads to bugs, which lead to spiders that eat the bugs, which also lead to spiders coming in the house. But where I live now, this new place that I live at, there's not very many spiders. There's definitely not as many as there are in Tennessee, but they exist. And in particular, I've found myself laying down in a room that has been dark for like 2 weeks basically. It's just been dark in here. Almost nothing has moved, nothing has been touched. But I'm in here because I don't want to wake up my wife by recording a video. And I was just laying in bed with her for about 2 hours. I haven't been able to get to sleep because I've been thinking about my dog again. In particular, I've been remembering the way that my dog died. If any of you remember Bert, he showed up in a lot of my live streams in 2019, and at other times he was in a lot of my vlogs, the brown dog with the big ears. He was very dear to me. I had him, since I was like 13, and he's been on the channel basically since the channel ever started. I mean, if you search through my videos long enough, you'll find videos of me when I was like basically an infant. That's an exaggeration, of course, but you'll find videos of me when I was really young, and you'll find videos of him there. So if you look hard enough, there's a lore. But the people who have been around for a long time know who the dog is. They know how much I loved him, and they know when he died. But the thing is, I have not really gotten over that death. I would say that the pain has just become less strong. The way that I watched him die, I think, was so grotesque and such a result of malpractice on the part of almost everyone involved that, of course, it sticks out in my mind, because having a friend die is bad enough. Having a small animal die is bad enough. But having them die at the hands of a breed of animal that should not even, like, be allowed to exist in the first place. Like, the fact that countries allow pit bulls to exist These dogs were literally bred to kill people and other animals. There is no reason for them to exist. They are like one of the most genocidal creatures in existence. But nonetheless, Americans like to own them, and they like to own dogs that are mixed with them. My mom was attached to a dog that was mixed with one. And, you know, he shouldn't have been in the house. He already tried to kill one of the other dogs. But he had to be let back in the house because it was cold outside and he would have died otherwise. I didn't want the dog to die. It also was a violation of the law having him out there. And he barked constantly, so there was no way to hide that fact. And even before, you know, they were getting in trouble with the local agencies back at that time, I didn't want him outside because it was too cold. I mean, you try to go to bed at night thinking about the fact that there's a freezing dog outside that has short hair. It doesn't matter what breed of dog it is. It doesn't matter how much you dislike the dog. It doesn't matter how much you don't want it around. Conceptualizing that pain is so much to bear. Like, it's too much. So I wanted him back in the house also. You know, it was January, it was winter time. The year had just begun, and I make the mistake of opening my door with that dog outside, you know, in the living room. Once again, the dog was too big to be in there. He shouldn't have been there. He got sent away when my mom initially couldn't take good enough care of him, and he almost killed one of the other dogs. My dad sent him away, and my mom, as like a power play against him, I guess, had the dog sent back because she claimed my dad didn't have the authority to send her dog away unilaterally, and so she brought him back. And, you know, several weeks after that, my mom's banging on my door and trying to get my attention to ask me about something, and I let my dog out of the room mistakenly because he runs out. Like, there was no way he wasn't going to run out of the room. There was another dog in heat, you know, in my sister's corner of the living room where she would sleep, surrounded by her furniture. And so the furniture basically made up this like walled area in the living room that she stayed in because my dad took all of her stuff out of her room and started quote unquote working on it, only to turn it into the de facto storage room. And she didn't want to sleep in my room, so she just slept in that corner with her dog. But you know, we were so poor at the time that we couldn't afford to have her dog fixed. So her dog was in heat over there in the corner, and my dog, also not being fixed, just charged, running off toward her. And of course, you know, my mom's dog, being half pit bull, immediately went to kill the smaller dog, as he had attempted to with that other small dog that he also attempted to kill. Now, the difference was that this time he actually did it, and then my dog died. And it's stuck in my head, the fact that happened. It's gotten easier over time, but to some extent it's just stuck in my head. And I came in here, into this other room, to talk about it because I have to talk to somebody about it. I mean, this shit's been keeping me awake for 2 hours while I'm trying to sleep. I can't wake up my wife and talk to her about it. I don't want to interrupt her sleep. So I went in here Yeah, I've been trying to refrain from making videos that are just like wallowing in sadness. I haven't wanted to make videos like that. These like depressing vent vlogs. In general, I've wanted to do things that are creative or insightful or positive at the very least. So I've done a lot of videos that have been attempts to like lift myself up. You know, if I'm in a bad mood, I'll record a vlog that's kind of me trying to give myself a pep talk to keep going. Or I'll make videos about my progress on becoming more emotionally stable or economically stable or disciplined or responsible. I'll make general progress report type videos. And when I do talk about subjects like trauma or emotional difficulties that I have, I try really hard to refrain from nihilism and like just wallowing in it, just wallowing in bad things that have happened. I always try to put a positive spin on it somehow. But I think some nights you really are just lying awake and you're thinking about, in painstaking, vivid detail, the last moments of your most favorite companion, your best friend's life, flash right before your eyes, be murdered right in front of you. But this animal that shouldn't have even been there, he should have been in somebody else's care, somebody who actually had a big enough house to take care of him. He shouldn't have been at our house where he was trying to kill other dogs because he was, not getting enough exercise because he was in this enclosed space. He shouldn't have been there. And that's what I said. I said, you're not responsible enough to have this deadly animal. You're not responsible enough. He shouldn't be here. And what do you know? What he did was deadly. I guess if I were to put a positive spin on this whole thing, I could say that there's a lesson that my mom learned, but it wasn't without a lot of hardship because my dad just kicked her out of the house after that. And that was really awful. I could have been more responsible in pushing back against that. It was the beginning of 2022 and it was cold outside. I should have not been so swayed by my emotions. I thought, okay, she's just gonna spend some of her check on a hotel somewhere, that's where she'll be. I didn't even know that after that happened, she ended up sleeping on the street. Back when I lived with those two, it felt like every single thing that they did that like vaguely involved the animals or the children or me, everything that like vaguely involved us was some power play. It especially felt like that when I was growing up, but even just these like little jabs at each other, like, he took the dog away, I'm sure in part due to some grievance he had with her, but primarily because it was irresponsible and it was a danger to have around. So he took it away, he had it sent off. She brings it back because it's just some jab at him, You don't have the authority to do that, you're disrespecting me. I'm gonna bring him back. And at the same time I'm recording this vlog, I'm hearing children and parents upstairs screaming at each other. noisy neighbors, I guess. I can't tell if it's upstairs or if it's down the hall. I really don't know, but everything was some power play against one another. And it felt like nothing ever actually involved us. Nothing ever was actually about us. It was all just, how can I channel my grievance toward you? In this case, I'm using the example of my dad or my mom. They would do this back and forth. How can I channel my grievance towards you, either dad or mom, by taking this set of actions? That's basically what they would do. And you could analyze the actions themselves in a vacuum, but they didn't exist in a vacuum. It was never really about the specific thing being done, almost never. The specifics of the fight, the specifics of what they would argue about, of what they would do, I don't think that mattered anywhere near as much as the broader context that surrounded it, which was the fact that they had grievances with one another that were irreconcilable, yet they were living with one another. So they would channel their grievances through these little conflicts, and sometimes big conflicts. But there would be externalities to all of those conflicts. And sometimes the externalities of that would be, the unintended consequences of that would be my sister's self-esteem being damaged, or, development being stunted, or, not being able to get adequate sleep that night, and so on. But other times they were more bloated and obvious, like in the case of me watching my dog literally die in front of me, because none of us could get the pit bull off of him before he died. And I think part of the reason as well why I was so agnostic on my mom being kicked out when she was she did literally nothing the whole time. She just stood there as both me and my dad were trying to save that little guy. She just stood there and watched. I don't think I should have let him kick her out. I don't think that was the right decision. And I used to feel guilty about the decisions that I made in light of that death, but I've been able to forgive myself because, I was grieving at the time. I was not thinking rationally. But yeah, I guess that's another positive thing to come out of that whole scenario is I learned something as well. You can't blame people you can't blame people in a disproportionate way. I may have lost Bird, but that doesn't mean that I can introduce even more harm into the world, even more negativity into the world by suddenly shafting and throwing out my mom. That's a disproportionate response, or even just enabling that decision, because every other time my dad would try to do that, I would always fight against it, and I would always be on her side, but that time I was agnostic about it in the wake of all of the grief that I was feeling, and I think that was an irresponsible response to the situation. And thankfully she was back after not very long. It was like 2 days. But there shouldn't have been that one night when she was sleeping outside. That should have never happened. I wouldn't have let it happen if she just told me that she was doing that, but that should have never happened. I should have been thinking straight. But now I know that, I don't live in circumstances where like an even remotely similar situation can occur, because I live in a very reasonable and stable situation now. But if things ever got really crazy again and some analogous situation were to occur, I could look at it and reasonably assess it and actually, like, prevent anything worse from happening. Like, you can't respond to people disproportionately, like, and you can't allow more negativity to come into the world just because something really bad happened. That doesn't help anybody. It most certainly doesn't help yourself. I don't know, man. I feel like absolute garbage, and I'm still trying to put a positive spin on this. Like, I just want to sleep. Like, I just want to get to sleep, and all I can think about is, like, these vivid images of my dead dog. Now, this is the kind of video I would have made in, like, 2019, struggling to get to sleep, and then posted and never revisited. But I started to think, oh, my standards on this channel are a lot higher than that now, so I'm not going to produce, like, vent content like that anymore, where there's not a lot of substance, there's not a lot of charisma. But at the same time, it's also my channel. It's also, a channel where I can post anything I want on here. Like, numbers don't matter to me. I'm not chasing clout. I actively tell undesirable people to unsubscribe from my channel. I'm not trying to enlarge my following. So, maybe having some semi-bad pleb filter content every now and again isn't such a bad thing. Especially if I need it, But I mean, really, at this point, I'm just watching a ticking clock, like, just waiting for the fucking hours to go by until I'm finally sleepy, and then until I'm finally so sleepy that I can get to sleep. Oh, Lord help, I just need some sleep. No, I can't wait for it to be winter. I just want it to snow. I want it to rain more. I don't know, man. These dark, untouched rooms are like the rooms that spiders like to hang out in. And these are usually like where they set up their fortress, their base. I just come in here and lay down. That was also a thing, like in that old house on my dad's, I would often wake up with spiders on me, and they would be like in my blankets and stuff. But honestly, I can't believe I managed to make it out of there, because there was a time when my self-esteem was so low that I thought, I'm never gonna make it out of here. And he did every single thing he could to try and to keep me to stay, to try and keep me staying there, so he could continue to take my disability. Because once again, He didn't want to work. He just wanted to exploit me for everything I had, so... I, fuck, man. I'm trying to put a positive spin on this. About being stuck awake. About being stuck awake. Thinking about my dead dog, I just literally can't. Like, I think sometimes you really cannot force it. I mean, I don't think you can ever force it, but sometimes it's like blatantly obvious that you can't. That things are just bad. And they might just be bad for the night, but you still have to live that night. And you have to live with whatever you're feeling at the time. It's not easy. I don't think it's easy for anyone. It's hard. But, there is something that was very hard that I was able to overcome. I managed to get on my own 2 feet and get a place of my own to live where my disability wasn't being taken from me all the time. Where I could actually control my own money. And still to this day, he begs me to come back. Every time I've ever gone anywhere to go live on my own, he's begged me and pleaded with me to get me to come back. And after leaving so many times, I eventually built up the self-esteem to be able to give a firm and resounding no. I refuse. And no matter how manipulative and complex his tactics would get, I've developed it within myself to be able to not engage, just say no, to assert myself. And that wasn't something I used to be able to do. But I think because I wasn't able to do that for a long time, I ended up becoming more powerless financially. That payee situation with the Social Security Administration, for example. For years, my dad was in control of my money. And I would leverage the fact that, hey, all I have to do is go there and say that I'm getting better and they'll cut it off. It wouldn't be true, but I said I could do that. And I could leverage that over him, and he would have more convoluted threats and I would back off. And I just felt trapped there. So now being in a place where I actually have control over my money is nice. But, it would be nice if the memories of when I lived in that place weren't so haunting still.